Welcome to UU Catskills. Let us join together in creating a sacred space for our worship together. Catherine will play the Hexen Dance, or the Witch's Dance by Clara Schumann. Thank you, Catherine. That was great. Now we'll have lighting of the chalice. I will share the screen. So if you have a chalice, you may light it now as I've lit mine. We light this chalice in grateful community, even in the darkest of times. Its flame light path to courage, justice, and hope. Please join me in the unison affirmation. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love to all living beings. May we know once again that we are not isolated, but connected in wonder and joy to mystery and miracle in the universe, in this community, and in each other. Now we will ask Bobbie to unmute, and Bobbie will introduce the subject of today's service, Many of us know Bobbie as she has been a long-time member of our congregation and is a well-known children's author and poet.
As we approach All Souls Day, let's welcome the spirit of our loved ones, those partners, friends, and ancestors who were important parts of our lives. Let's include them in today's service. Remember them not as they were sick or in pain or lost in the muddle of dementia. Remember them in joyful times, whole and healthy. Picture them smiling, even laughing. Picture them sharing a walk or a film or a joke, even a good meal. No concerns with social distancing. There's plenty of room. Welcome them. Yes, welcome them.
Thank you, Bobbie. Let's go now to the Not for Children Only.
I forgot.
Oh, never mind. That's fine. What we'll do is...
Can you have it a little later?
Yeah, that's fine. We're going to go now to the topic of today. And as it's the 31st of October, it's in Mexico, it's the Day of the Dead. But here we have asked Bobbie Katz, our longtime member and founding driving force behind our UUCC Memorial Garden, to speak on this topic. Karl Beard will also be speaking. Karl is a longtime member too of UUCC, a previous board member and previous chair of the Buildings and Grounds Committee, as well as the current chair of the Memorial Garden Committee. Karl recently retired from a career in conservation. He started as a climbing ranger and naturalist for Mohonk Preserve at the time that organization was established, where, among other things, he helped reintroduce peregrine falcons to Mohonk's cliffs. For over 30 years afterwards, Karl was a conservation planner with the National Park Service, helping to create new parks and trails and protect rivers. If you have enjoyed rail trails in New York, you may be familiar with some of his work. And Karl features in my first visit to UUCC in 1999. As a longtime Unitarian from Vancouver, I had moved to the Hudson Valley and was keen to introduce my fiance, Ian Giddy, to the local UU church. Karl greeted us and said, "Oh, you are the Ian Giddy who wrote the Hudson River Water Trail Guide." Our connection to UUCC was instantly cemented, thanks to Karl's welcome. So I'm just going to share my screen again. And I should mention that the offering today, our half plate donation, is to be shared with the Hudson, Sustainable Hudson Valley. And Catherine, let me ask you to unmute so that you can play the Pavane pour un enfant défunt by Maurice Ravel. Thank you, Catherine. And I think Bobbie is now ready to read us the Not for Children Only. And Bobbie, can you unmute? And I will just share the screen briefly and show people what book Bobbie is reading from. It's her own book of poems.
Well, an invitation. Let's be spooky. Let's have fun. We'll scare ourselves before we're done with ghosts and goblins, winds that howl, things that fly, and things that prowl. We'll talk about such creepy stuff until we both get scared enough to hear things that we cannot see and see things that just cannot be. Let's be spooky, you and me. Your shadow says, I am you, but bigger than you, and longer than you, and darker than you. You are me, but smaller than me, and shorter than me, and afraid of me. Uncle James, my Uncle James was a terrible man. He cooked his wife in the frying pan. She's far too tender to bake or boil. He cooked her up in peanut oil. But sometime later, a month or more, there came a knock upon Uncle's door, a great green devil. See him? A great green devil was standing there. He caught my uncle by the hair. Are you the uncle that cooked his wife and leads such a terribly wicked life? My uncle yowled like an old tomcat, but the devil took him for all of that. Oh, take a tip from my Uncle James. Don't throw stones. Don't call names. Just be as good as ever you can and never cook ants in a frying pan. Let's see what else we have. Here's an ad from Wanted, a witch's cat. Wanted, a witch's cat. Must have vigor and spite, be expert at hissing and good in a fight, and have balance and poise on a broomstick at night. And here she is. Look at that. Look, look, look at that. Ghosts lined up at the laundromat all around the block. Each has bleach and some detergent. Each one seems to think it urgent to take a spin in a washing machine before the clock strikes Halloween. And here's the very last poem in the book, Skeleton Parade. The skeletons are out tonight. They march about the street with bony bodies, bony heads, and bony hands and feet. Bony, bony, bony bones with nothing in between. Up and down and all around they march on Halloween.
Thank you, Bobbie. Those are very appropriate for this Halloween. And now we'll move on to the homily, or that you and Karl are going to present to us today. And I will share the screen again so that we can see some of the pictures of the memorial garden. Or the meditation garden, memorial garden. Now, I think it was Bobbie who was going to talk first.
Yes. If you are a member or a friend of UU Catskill, you are entitled to something very valuable, to which many of you may not have given a second thought. You are entitled to use any or all of the amenities of the memorial garden. You can choose to become a permanent member of this congregation without the stress of pledge drives or committee meetings. If this wasn't the era of mute buttons, I'd probably hear people say, memorial, isn't that something for dead people? Who wants it? Who needs it? I need it and you do too. Unless you're immortal like those Greek gods who probably are still based on Mount Olympus, bored out of their minds after all these centuries. Zeus probably takes off now and then to inspire some sexual harassing in Albany, while Poseidon heads for Mar-a-Lago. Now think of the petunias you planted last May, or the tree that your great-grandfather planted years ago, or that twinkling star that was already millions of years old when you wished on it. Well, in the middle of November, what's happened to May's petunias? Great-grandpa's trees will last much longer than flowers, yet eventually it will topple over. In millions of years, that twinkling star will implode or explode. Yes, one day or one night, we'll do it, preferably while we're peacefully sleeping. And yes, we'll do it, we'll die. Hopefully with smiles on our faces. We'll have to be taken someplace. Consider a crematory. As a member or a friend, once you're recycled, scattered, or interred, You'll be joining other members and friends right here at our unique UU Memorial Garden for a fraction of the cost of being in a traditional cemetery. Meanwhile, live with joy and generosity, gratitude for the gift of life on our beautiful planet. Each day, find a portion of peace until it's time to rest in peace. But before you do, how about a few hours of fun and satisfaction? I recommend joining our memorial committee on our next workday. When spring and summer roll around again and we're back in the sanctuary, hopefully, settle down on one of the boulders in the memorial circle or take a walk along the path of remembrance. And on a more serious note, here's how we happen to have a memorial garden. Deep into an August night, turning toward morning in 1995, the phone woke me with the worst news any parent can receive. My son had been killed, his crushed body in a New Hampshire hospital. A kind doctor told me his death was probably an accident, but I knew clearly it was a suicide. Josh had been plagued by mental illness for close to 7 years. It wasn't a surprise, but the finality of his death was devastating. When I see films of neighborhoods ravaged by hurricanes on TV, I recognize something familiar. That's how I felt, torn and slammed down, ravaged. The funeral was held the next day at the Reformed Jewish Temple in Newburgh. The rabbi didn't know my son. There were a surprising number of people considering the short notice. Yet, as I drove home, I was alone. I had no spiritual community and very few friends nearby. The French author Marcel Proust once said, "Books are the children of solitude." And I had been giving birth to those children one by one by one for many years. None of them were able to put a comforting arm around me. Later that week, there was a service for Josh at Dartmouth, triggered by a composer he'd been close to. While a friend from Beacon was driving me, I suddenly realized there was no minister or rabbi to guide the service, no one but me. Our first stop was Josh's apartment. The neatly folded laundry he had taken from my place less than a week earlier was on his bed. His Bible was there too, with markers for 2 Psalms. We drove on to Dartmouth. The service worked out well. There was beautiful original music. His Dartmouth roommate from so many years earlier read the Psalms Josh had marked in his Bible. I read A Scarcity of Words, the last of my poems that I shared with Josh. His father agreed to pick up Josh's ashes at the undertaker's, and he believed that he owned them. A week or so later, when I wanted to plant a tree with them, he refused. Possession is 9/10 of the law, he said. Earlier in this summer, on a visit from Vermont where he'd been living, my son wanted to attend a Unitarian service. We discovered this congregation. While my kids were growing up, we had joined the UU Church in Newburgh that moved to Rock Tavern. When my husband and I separated, I stopped attending. Too many guys in the congregation were asking to take me ice skating or to lunch or the movies. I simply couldn't get involved. It took 2 years for our separation to become a divorce. I moved to New York City to find more steady work. I found a great apartment, but not a UU congregation that felt right. It took a few months after Josh's death before I started attending services at UU Catskill. I liked Reverend Linda's sermon, and I liked Reverend Linda. The coffee was strong and good. I pledged as a friend. Still, I hesitated to join. I remembered how much time I devoted to my earlier UU congregation. Now, however, I had to generate enough money to live on. Fortunately, I got poem and book assignments with pressing due dates. After I had been a friend of RUU for a couple of years, my ex, who'd been controlling our son's ashes, relented. I finally had a small blue box containing them. I could hardly believe that this man-child who had filled my heart and consciousness for 38 years could be reduced to fit in this little cardboard box. Now I had to decide how to properly offer respect to these remnants of a gifted and hardworking man. What would he have wanted? Unitarian Universalism was threaded through my son's life from when he was a child. He was playing saxophone in the Paris metro when he was 19, when Madeline from the UU youth group in Rock Tavern recognized him. And she was working as a nanny for a French family. And they became good friends. Wherever he happened to be, Josh seemed to find a Unitarian connection. When I asked Rev Linda if I could donate $3,000 to create a memorial garden for members, she said that it would be a real mark of our expanding and maturing as a congregation. I joined, and with the board's approval, my donation was accepted. We started having meetings following Sunday services. I hadn't imagined the reality that once I had donated what seemed to me a very big chunk of money, I'd have no more say than anyone else in deciding how to use it. The simple rectangle of wildflowers with a natural bench or two that I imagined was not what anyone else wanted. Even though the Bohuniacs were donating their bodies to science, they added $2,000. So now we had $5,000. Bill, I believe, checked with the local government. Could we even have a memorial that allowed interring and scattering of ashes? Yes, we could. In the process, we learned ashes were to be known as cremains. What about pets? It seemed to me that people should be able to scatter cremains of pets, dogs and cats, a beloved gerbil, or maybe a pet mouse. a woman was in a fury that she would have to have her horse cremated before the remains could be placed in the memorial garden. Outraged, she never came back to a meeting or to the UU. Things were getting more and more complicated. Bill Vahuniak wanted a landscape business to plan the garden. Someone else wanted a fountain. Another person thought a bunch of chairs and a few pots of flowers would suffice. There was a core of people sincerely interested in creating a memorial garden, and a hostile couple who only had negative things to say about the whole idea but never missed a meeting. I spent a few Saturdays visiting various memorial gardens in New York State and Connecticut. I talked to some of the people involved with creating these spaces that had budgets of $50,000 or more. Most of what I saw were so much more developed outside, but with a closed-in feeling, far from what I had imagined. I had also hoped for a place where we could not only place ashes, but where we might be in touch with nature, in touch with the spirits of our loved ones, linking memory with our lived lives. I was beginning to give up hope when a knight arrived with skills, focus, and creativity. That guy, Karl.
Thank you, Bobbie. Well, so here's where I pick up the story. And in my telling of the origin story, it's actually an ordinary bystander who happens to overhear or to be told a part of the story you've just heard, and who thinks maybe to help. And it's about that challenge of translating the couple of individual gifts into some sort of tangible asset for the congregation as a whole in a way that we hoped would be meaningful and lasting and hopefully self-sustaining. So taking a big step back, the meta question behind it all might be something like, how do you picture yourself, your place in the universe? All right, that's a simple question, right? So maybe let's start with that. But from there, how might that fit into this particular community and this congregation? See how we're zeroing in a little bit there. And then how might that be expressed in some physical form on the ground in our humble piece of real estate with limited area, limited budget, and frankly, limited organizational capacity? Well, we didn't really ask it that way. And in fact, our minds may tend to address those questions in reverse order from the immediate and practical to the abstract if we ever get there. And as Unitarians, the first thing we do is not actually to kill all the lawyers, as Shakespeare might have suggested, but to form a committee. And from there to figure out how to move ahead with some strategy. So our Memorial Garden Committee held meetings and listening sessions. And as you might imagine, we also had many individual and small scale discussions. We also took a poll of the congregation in 2002 with some guided questions as well as some open-ended. And through all of this, we uncovered a wealth of ideas along with the opinions that went with them. For example, we should have a simple wildflower garden or a field of wildflowers, or a walking labyrinth with some discussion about what style of labyrinth, the classical style or the cathedral at Chartres style, or a garden of flowers and shrubs installed by a local landscape company, or a natural area with a walking path with benches for seating and ashes scattered freely along the way. Or a columbarium of some kind with niches for the placement of urns. Or a patio of flagstone pavers interplanted with walkable fragrant herbs. Or a dry-laid stone wall with seating capstones arrayed in a circle. It could be a place to gather, maybe even hold outdoor services. So how do we want to provide for the interment of ashes, what we call cremains, cremated remains? Do we want them in urns, in biodegradable containers, or simple scattering of ashes? And then where should it all go? This is at a time when we were thinking about expanding our facilities and maybe completely reconfiguring our campus. So should it go next to the sanctuary and almost be a part of it? Or should it go on a separate part of the property, say below the farmhouse, or in the field of brambles that's beyond the far parking lot? And what would happen if we moved to another place, another thing we were contemplating at the time? Because once we inter ashes of our loved ones, it might become more difficult to move. I joked at the time that we were a congregation of maybe 100 members with at least 150 and quite possibly 200 very different opinions. But even so, gradually, through the many meetings and discussions and checking in with our peers in other parts of the country, we converged on a sense of the design and construction, and along with the policies and so on. We tried to find the common denominators in all that we heard. One key message that we gathered along the way was this: it should be a place for return of atoms on loan from the universe. That's a beautiful thought, borrowed from others, recognizing that nature has its own plans for what to do with the stuff that we're made of. And then let it be simple. Let it be organic in design, reflective of the natural world. Again, referring back to those original 3 questions. So if I could have the first image there. So this is where we came out. This is a sketch of the preliminary design of the memorial garden. We converged around the concept of a circle that down in the corner by the sanctuary that would be connected to a path through the woods and around our pond. You do know that we have a pond, don't you? And from there, it would go to a small field where we might have wildflowers and a return path to the sanctuary. There would be places to sit, to walk, and to gather. Rustic wood trail bridges would span the wet areas, and a few meaningful trees could be planted along the way. You might note the redbud tree that's by the gate where the ashes of Bobbie's son are interred. That's a tree that that's become, we come to think of as Lazarus because of the way it seems to have returned from the dead so many times. Now, the actual design on the ground has changed somewhat from what you see here, but this is the basic idea that we work from. The most important part of it is the circle, because after all, the circle is the shape of community. It's the shape of inclusion. In different cultures, the circle is a symbol of unity, of wholeness, to some of monotheism, of infinity, of the returning cycles of day and night and of the seasons. It's the shape of the sun and the moon. It's a symbol of safety and protection, of rebirth and regeneration. And it's symbolic of the center of our being in a larger world and universe. You might also think of the mandala, or the yin and yang, or the Japanese enso, or of labyrinth, or the sacred circles of indigenous Americans, the places we know as medicine wheels, as well as ancient stone circles all around the world. So if we could have the second picture, our circle honors the meaning of the circle through many traditions, but it is not any of those circles. It is our circle, and it's a metaphor for our community. It's a ring of seeding stones standing on a pad of finely crushed stone. Around the perimeter, as you see here, there are mapped and numbered places of interment of ashes within or without biodegradable containers. And it can also be a place for scattering of ashes. There are no formal markers anywhere on the ground. If we could have the next picture. For that, standing nearby is an outdoor memorial wall, a common marker. It holds plaques that are engraved with the names of those we want to remember, some of whom are interred here, many of whom are not. It was designed and built by a local metal worker and artist. This is his drawing. And if we could have the next slide. This is what it looks like in real life. It's open to the elements. It's a design we adopted from the congregation in Des Moines, Iowa, with whom we had corresponded. It's meant to be natural weathering. If we could have the next slide. From the stone circle, a gate leads to a short footpath through the woods and the wetland around our pond. It's a place for walking as well as for scattering ashes. It is for people and it is for pets. Something not shown is the book of Remembrance, where you can create a page or a spread for your loved one. It's kept in the minister's office and it's brought out at special times for memorial services or other times of remembrance. Our use of the memorial garden and the path is guided by a set of policies that help us through decisions and to answer questions that tend to come at difficult times. So if we could have the next picture. So here's the memorial garden, the stone circle, as it stands today. It was built in 2008, and it has its own stories to tell. The stones themselves are a Catskill bluestone from a nearby quarry. These are a sandstone from the Middle and Upper Devonian for people who think about such things. They were formed from the sands that were deposited 400 to 350 million years ago, when the Catskill Delta, the outflow of these huge Himalayan scale mountains that stood to the east of us, at a time when continents were colliding and the predecessor to the Atlantic Ocean was drawing shut. These stones, these materials have been transformed through time, and they are old friends. We invite you to sit with them and get to know them. The Day of the Dead is a time of remembrance, when people gather to remember and honor deceased loved ones. We celebrate the scariness and the fun of Halloween for sure, but we also embrace the loss. And we embrace the spirit of connection with those present and those departed. We're talking about the memorial garden during this remembrance, but we remind you that it is also an everyday part of our community, of our congregation. It is a place of stories, of memories, of meditation, and it is a gift, and it is an invitation to connection. As we like to say, may it be so. Thank you.
Thank you, Karl. That was so interesting to hear from both of you. And I encourage everyone in the congregation next time you're at UUCC to walk outside and sit on one of these beautiful old rocks and contemplate and think, what will you do in the future? Where will your remains be? Now we come to contemplation and compassion, and we will just have a couple of minutes this morning to relax. And we have the music of Tibetan singing bowls. And this is very appropriate, as yesterday, to draw attention to the Climate Change Conference, COP26, our own climate action team asked a musician named Teresa to join our group, and we gathered on the site of Temple Emmanuel and made music, and Teresa brought her singing bowls. Now we come to the final poem of our service today. And this is where we will become unmuted, Bobbie and Catherine and Karl, as we each take turns reading We Remember Them by Sylvan Cammons and Rabbi Jack Riemer. At the rising sun and at its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. Bobbie, unmute. Bobbie, I will read the next section. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of the autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. Catherine.
When we are weary, and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them.
When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. For as long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them.
Thank you all. Now it is time to extinguish the chalice as I have extinguished mine. And read the words with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Catherine, will you lead us in the sung benediction, please?
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Thank you, everyone.